So how many prisoners and former prisoners are involved, and how much money could this cost? Earlier this afternoon, Corrections Minister Judith Collins joined me in the studio here, and I asked her, how big is this?
Well, I think it's potentially rather big, but I'd also say that it's not the end of the world, because it relates to people who, not all of our prisoners obviously, and we have about 9,700 prisoners, and Corrections have said that around about 500 of them will be serving less than what Corrections would have thought.
That's right now, right?
That's right now.
But if we go back to 2002, if we go back 13 years, what is the total number we're talking about?
Well, they don't know what that is yet, because of course they only got the decision yesterday, although they clearly had indications, so they were doing some work beforehand around existing prisoners. But as for prisoners who have long, gone already, we've got the Prisoner and Victims Claims Act, and we've also got the Limitation Act that come into force.
Okay.
So without actually being able to go through every one, we don't quite know what that is, but Corrections has said that in some cases it will be people who have served some days more, some weeks more, and there may even be some with some months more.
Some months more, okay. If we go back to 2002, it's my understanding that on the 26th of July, the Crown did in fact put a broad brushstroke sense of how big it is before the Supreme Court, as a way of saying, hey, this is big, think carefully, Supreme Court.
Yes.
What figures did they put forward?
Well, I haven't got those figures with me, John, but because I didn't get obviously involved in the case and I couldn't, I'm not able to instruct Corrections on that.
Are we talking about thousands of prisoners?
I think that there might be over the years, because you're talking 14 years worth. And
so if we're talking 500 now, and we times that by 14...
Well, I think that might be a little bit broad brush, because of the fact that some of these prisoners, many of them have been in jail for a very long time, and I don't think you can just do that. They're not changing them every day.
Okay, so let's kick on. So we're talking about thousands probably, aren't we?
It might be, yeah.
And so what is the Crown's exposure to this in fiscal terms, do you think? We're talking tens of millions of dollars, aren't we?
Well, we're still getting advice on that, and I would say that that's what someone might want to claim, but Corrections' advice to me, and their legal advice to me, is that any such claims would be rigorously defended. And they'd be defended on this basis, that Corrections in 2002 we were given legislation by Parliament.
The Parole Act.
The Parole Act. And they interpreted the Act a certain way. That has apparently been upheld over 4 times by the Court of Appeal. And if Corrections had in fact interpreted the Act other than what the Court of Appeal said they should, then they would have been outside
all of that
the
is
law.
true. All of that is true.
So,
but Minister, you're playing brilliant politics here, and you're so gosh, and there's a surprise.
Oh well,
but the Supreme Court was unanimous, weren't they? We're unanimous.
Yeah.
End of story.
Well, I'd also say there is a court higher than the Supreme Court, and that is Parliament. And I think that Parliament has clearly, in 2002, produced a law that was clearly subject to interpretation and different interpretations. The fact that the law at the time of those 14 years was what the Court of Appeal had interpreted it as, I think Corrections is in a much better position than some might think, and certainly that is the legal advice that's been made available to me.
Yeah, that sounds fairly disingenuous to me. With all due respect to your legal advisors, we are sitting here. Actually, I've ploughed through the Supreme Court judgment. I don't mean to be rude, but they dished it out to the Crown. I mean, they're just not sentimental. You lost unanimously. It's clear. They've found in favour of the appellant. It's all very well. And look, we are going back to before you were in government. But in fact, we are talking thousands of prisoners and tens of millions of dollars of exposure.
Well, we'll see. And I think that, John, that any prisoner who thinks that they've been hard done by because they've committed an offence while they've been in jail, and that should have been, the fact they're already in jail should have been taken into account, I have to say that doesn't take into account what happens to their victims,
No,
but
Minister,
also...
it's the law.
Well,
it's the law. You're starting to sound
no.
a bit like Duterte here. The law is the law.
Actually, John, I am a very experienced lawyer.
Absolutely.
And
And you know the law is the law.
Yes, and I can tell you that the law today is different in its effect than the law 3 days ago, because the law 3 days ago was what the Court of Appeal had interpreted
Okay,
as.
so where does this leave you now? For example, if we are talking about thousands of people, are you, not you obviously, sorry Minister,
not personally.
No, absolutely not. You're busy enough. But is corrections going to track these people down and say, hey, on the face of it?
Well, I haven't heard from them on that one yet. They are still dealing with what they've received yesterday. They are getting advice. They have given me what they have. And I would say that this is something that the Parliament may need to revisit, and particularly around the Parole Act.
In fact,
Justice Young
he says
has
quite
made it
explicitly.
very clear.
He says quite explicitly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't remove your exposure, does it?
Well,
Can you revisit it retrospectively?
Well, it can, but that's up to Parliament, and I'm never a fan of retrospective legislation, although there are times when it has been used, and I've probably used it too. But it's very important, I think, not for corrections and for myself and for the government not to overreact, but actually to get the facts, look at what we're talking about, and then...
And absolutely, and I think that's entirely appropriate in response to this judgment. Yeah. Given that the Crown, it seems to me, were copping it in July in the Supreme Court, I think they had a pretty tough time in there. When did someone come to you and go, whoops-a-daisy, Minister, we're in trouble here?
Well, I was warned, I would say some weeks ago, that there might be something happening on this, but until it's actually happened, there's nothing we can do. Really.
And what did your warning say
well,
about the extent of the Crown's exposure?
We're not sure how it's going to go, because there were some questions being asked in court. And the fact is that until this happens, what can we do? We can't go in. When a matter is before the Supreme Court, we cannot rush through. I don't think we can do it. Legislation retrospectively, and also, by the way, under urgency, to say just in case that Supreme Court does something we don't like.
That would be outrageous.
That would be outrageous,
Absolutely
and I'm
outrageous.
always going to wait until the decision.
Okay. You've waited for the decision, you've got the decision, what next?
Well, I'm going to Cabinet on Monday, where I will provide an oral item to my colleagues about the effect of this.
That's going to be in private, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So are you going to say, holy moly, we're in up to our necks here?
No.
Because that's what... But if you logically follow what the Supreme Court's saying, you are actually in up to your necks, aren't you?
No, not really, because I think we have alternatives. One of them is the Prisoner and Victims Claims Act. Some of them is we have to get every... Corrections has to go through and do some assessments on exactly what this means across the board. Because you and I today, we're sort of having a bit of a guess about how many we're talking about.
Yes, we are. Yes,
and
we
need to have that. But also,
Minister, you mentioned the Prisoners and Victims Claims Act, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't take the onus off the Crown to pay money.
No, it doesn't.
It just might determine where the money goes to.
Exactly.
It might actually see it go to the victims as part of reparations that haven't previously been paid.
That's
Still means you're financially liable, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And I'd say that there are many people who would feel that if anyone deserves an apology, it should be the victims. Because particularly when you're talking about serial violent offenders, it's the victims who, by the way, have had to suffer and who know now that some of the perpetrators are not going to serve the sentence that they thought that they were going to get. That's who I think, if anyone misses out in a big way, it's the victims.
Judith Collins.